And that is the entire pasteurization process. 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds.
These bacteria are not very strong. 15 seconds?
No, and in fact, that's designed for the most heat resistant. Most of these pathogens, so we talk about Listeria or Campylobacter, E. coli, you're going to achieve much higher than a 5-log reduction of those pathogens with that heat treatment. But we do it to reduce the most heat resistant, so the one that's kind of the strongest, by at least 5-log, which is a big reduction.
Nicole, when you think about the raw milk, revolution, it's all about that process. Is that what everybody says ruins the milk, that 15 seconds? What ruins the milk?
Truly, this is a very minimal process, right?
Hello, everyone. This is Matt Lucy, host of Dairy Digressions. As someone who has spent years on the editorial side of both the Journal of Dairy Science and JDS Communications, I know what it takes to run elite journals. To be successful, we need authors to submit their very best papers and reviewers to carefully evaluate the work. The new ADSA loyalty program gives something back to the authors and reviewers who keep our journals strong. Reviewers and corresponding authors earn points towards discounted article publication charges. If you're deciding where to submit your best work this year, or deciding which paper in your inbox you should review, consider the advantages that the ADSA loyalty program brings to you. Head to adsa.org for details. Hello, and thanks for joining us for this episode of Dairy Digressions, a podcast from the American Dairy Science Association, the Journal of Dairy Science, and JDS Communications. I'm Matt Lucy, former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Dairy Science and JDS Communications, and a fellow of the American Dairy Science Association. I'll be your host. Dairy Digressions offers an insider's perspective on the science, the scientists shaping conversations both within and beyond the dairy sector. We highlight innovative research that advances understanding and fuels progress in the production and processing of milk for people around the world. Welcome to the show. Today we're tackling a topic that generates a lot of debate and not always a lot of clarity: raw or unpasteurized milk and cheese. I've invited 3 experts across the cow and human spectrum to explore this topic from multiple angles. First, I'd like to introduce Pam Ruegg back to the podcast. Hello, Pam.
Hi, Matt. So nice to be here.
Dr. Ruegg is a veterinarian and professional large animal clinical sciences at Michigan State, where she holds the David J. Ellis Chair in Antimicrobial Resistance. She earned a DVM at Michigan State, Masters of Preventative Medicine from UC Davis, and her career has focused on improving animal health and milk quality using rigorous epidemiological methods. You consider yourself an epidemiologist, Pam?
I am kind of a hack epidemiologist,
Okay.
but my MPVM at Davis actually is in epidemiology.
She is formerly of the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
20 years.
20 years as a milk quality specialist, past president of the National Mastitis Council, and currently contributes to USDA funding research on how dairy cattle microbiome relates to antibiotic resistance. Thanks for coming back on, Pam. Appreciate it very much.
I am also a fellow of the American Dairy Science Association.
But I was a fellow first. I was the first fellow. Okay, I just want to be clear.
But I'm kind of thinking when you said that I should be a gal of the American Dairy Science Association rather than
That's right. I don't know where this fellow thing, I don't know. I don't know if it's gender neutral or not. I don't know. But next, Nicole Martin, a returning member to the Dairy Digressions community. Welcome, Nicole.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Nicole is an expert on everything dairy foods and dairy processing. She's at Cornell. She directs the milk quality improvement program. I did not know we could improve milk quality. I thought it was all wonderful. There's improvements we can make on milk quality.
Listen, I have job security is what I'll tell you.
She's a Cornell Dairy Food Center. She's earned all 3 degrees at Cornell, and she's trained in microbiology and animal science. She focuses on how milk is handled and processed and tested for milk safety and quality. And she's deeply involved in the dairy industry, particularly in real world settings, including controlling pathogens and understanding processes like pasteurization. that we're going to learn about today, right, Nicole?
That's absolutely right.
You're going to defend the dirty old P word, right? The pasteurization. Everything bad happens after you pasteurize milk, I thought.
Goodness gracious. We've had it for 100 years. I think we can defend it well at this point.
There's been 100 years of research saying it's safe and beneficial, right? Is that what we're going to say
Exactly.
about it? I don't want to take away your steam, okay? I've got specific questions for you.
I'll tell you all about it.
Okay. And finally, new member, Dare Digressions podcast, Dr. Daniel Griffin. I have become acquainted to Daniel's phenomenal insights into human health by listening to TWIV, This Week in Virology, the podcast all about viruses, the kind that make you sick. Okay, that's a different kind of virus. I love TWIV. He works with Vincent Racaniello, Daniel's weekly clinical update, where he touches on all things infectious disease, including things that cross from cows to humans. Welcome, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
I became really interested because you like to talk about cow things. You talk about raw milk, but you also talk a lot about high path influenza and the movement between cows and humans of that guy. So you seem to be interested in high path influenza.
I'm a cattle owner. I don't know if people are aware of that.
What? What kind of cows?
So in Uganda, we have a clinic right on the Uganda-Kenya border. And back in late 2019, I bought my first gal. She was pregnant at the time. She had a girl, and then the girl had a couple boys. I'm not so happy because I prefer the gals because, I much prefer drinking milk to what we end up doing with the boys when they grow up. But I grew up in Colorado. I spent 20 plus years. All my kids were born in Colorado. So they grew up like milking and, having a lot of exposure. But yeah, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, that's what really has gotten us talking about cattle and milk and safety issues on the Virology podcast.
I didn't know you own cattle. I don't own a cow. Pam, do you own a cow? Do you own a cow?
No, but I could have owned a whole bunch because my husband's from a dairy farm and we had the chance to own it.
But you didn't buy it.
You passed.
My husband and I could not work together.
In Africa, you need to own cattle to have any kind of street credit. There's a whole rule, like you're not allowed to have more wives than cattle. So
that's right. But Nicole, do you own a cow?
I wish I did. I own a farm, but it's only, got children and chickens and fruit trees and vegetables. Yeah.
Okay. And Daniel, you're going to have to tell us about your sailing career because it sounds like you're an avid sailor as well. I'm guessing you sail to Uganda or you take a plane?
No, unfortunately, I take a plane. So
okay. You're not doing that. Dr. Griffin is a physician scientist and infectious disease expert affiliated with Columbia University. He trained at NYU School of Medicine, completed his internal medicine residency at the University of Utah, and later earned a PhD in molecular medicine. His expertise spans infectious disease, virology, parasitology, global health. In fact, actively involved in both clinical care and research, working from HIV to stem cell biology to emerging diseases like COVID-19. And Dr. Griffin also has extensive international experience treating patients and studying tropical diseases. He's a familiar voice in science communication as co-host of the podcast This Week in Parasitism and TWIV. So Daniel has come along just to kind of bridge the gap between this topic of raw milk and what happens in people, because I know that's a topic you talk a lot about and you think a lot about. And so Daniel will be along today. Thanks for joining us, Daniel.
Oh, I'm excited. Hopefully I can add a clinician perspective to all this expertise.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to achieve here. But we're going to start with Nicole. So Nicole, why are we, what is it? Is this just same old, or am I getting the sense that there's more buzz around raw milk now than before? So from your perspective as a food scientist and a person who takes milk and processes it for human consumption, is it just me or is it real? We're getting a little more buzz around raw milk right now.
Well, we're certainly hearing a lot about it lately, and part of that is because of the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again movement that advocates for consumption of unpasteurized milk. Some of it is just we've seen, this sort of return to natural foods, and I put that in air quotes, post-COVID, and folks really looking for, more connection to their food supply. And then, obviously there's a lot of buzz around the legalization of sale of raw or unpasteurized milk. And we see a lot of states who are considering legislation that would legalize in one way or another the sale of unpasteurized milk. So I don't think that we're imagining it. I do think that this is something that we're seeing across the US and consumers are really paying attention to. Although I would caution that this is still a very, very small proportion of the population who chooses to consume unpasteurized milk, but it is growing, and we have some pretty good numbers to show that the consumption is on the rise of unpasteurized milk.
Daniel, you talk a lot about the anti-vaccine movement on TWIV, and do you think are these two movements correlated in your mind, this raw milk movement and the anti-vaxxer movement, or are they just two separate movements in your mind?
Yeah, no, so it's more than correlated. It's often the same group. But no, there's this movement where it's really sort of an anti-establishment, this idea that they've been hiding that good, healthy raw milk from us, and they know how great that is, and they don't want us to consume that because then we would all live forever and never have to go see a doctor. And it's the same individuals in a lot of these areas. So sort of sending this same, unfortunately, disturbing message, which is, so much of what we've learned, so much of what has made life better, so many of these diseases, and we'll talk more about this, vaccine preventable diseases, but also diseases we see from raw milk. This used to be something that I saw like when I was hanging out with the Maasai and they're getting brucellosis, or when I was up in Uganda where we would see issues there, or maybe I would worry about people bringing unpasteurized cheese and products into the US. Now it's right here at home. We're seeing a lot of these issues.
Do you think that is there money to be made? Is that the rationale? I mean, why tell people not to get vaccinated and to drink raw milk? Is it
should we let them in on the secret, Matt? Because there's a lot of money to be made in misinforming the population.
Oh my goodness.
I joke about that, but it's true, right? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of money to be made in this racket.
So Nicole, what I was looking, I read a paper, and I don't know how much updated information we have. A 2022 paper. It's actually these authors were working for the CDC and the FDA in 2022, and it was just sort of summarizing raw milk regulation across different states. And you brought up in your comments that certain states are looking at sort of loosening the raw milk laws. And that's what was brought up in this paper. They marked the law changes in state laws that made it easier to maybe access raw milk from 2012 to 2018. And Vermont, West Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas, Illinois, North Dakota, Wyoming, Utah, all sort of had loosened up the laws around this. Is that what you're referring to? Is New York, for example, is New York State looking at loosening up the laws around raw milk?
It is not currently, but it is legal to sell raw milk on farm in New York State for permitted farms. And there are rules around that, and there are testing requirements, but it is legal here. That is, something that we've had for quite some time. But there's anything between, a state that currently does not allow the sale of raw milk to, open up the sale of raw milk on farm to, legislation around allowing sale of raw milk in retail locations, which, is kind of a whole nother level of potential risk involved with the pathogens and foodborne illnesses that we talk about as being a risk with sale of raw milk. So it's really a state by state issue, and the landscape is very diverse as far as what these laws allow in individual states. So I mentioned New York State, where sale is legal on the farm with permitting. In California, the sale of raw milk is legal in retail stores. And in some other places, it's, something even less than that, which might be, cow share agreements. You can buy a share of a cow and then drink the milk from your own cow, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's a huge diversity in the landscape of these laws across the U.S.
So Cornell is Cornell, and I think people look to Cornell for advice. I think that I grew up in New York State, and you look to Cornell, and if it's agriculture, dairy cows, you're going to be like, okay, what does Cornell say? So if Nicole Martin came out hard and say, look at you silly legislators, we need to like hammer on this thing and not go backward in time. Would Cornell say, Nicole, really just stick to your milk processing plant and stay out of the politics? How would Cornell respond to that? I mean, because Cornell is a big deal.
Sure. So we actually do have a position statement on
fantastic.
Consumption of raw milk. Do I think that we are going to affect state laws on this matter? These are complex issues. The states are potentially dealing with trying to test the product coming off farm, so regulation in order to test to reduce the incidence of outbreaks. I don't think that there's any reason to believe that actually works. In fact, we see that foodborne disease burden is higher in states that have legal sale of raw milk. There's a revenue factor to this, right? So if you legalize the sale, then you can tax that product. It's not simply a public health issue when it comes to these laws. So we can, as scientists and as Cornell or Michigan State or anywhere else, say, here's what the science says. But the reality is that these laws are developed around a large set of different factors that are complex and not always with public health at the forefront.
So I want to jump over to Pam for a second, and just kind of ask you, Nicole. I'm assuming that a lot of these raw milk farms are maybe smaller dairies or unconventional dairies. Or are they coming off big commercial dairies that might be typical of the industry? I mean, what is the typical dairy? I guess what I'm trying to say, does raw milk come off of 60 cow dairies or 5,000 cow dairies? That's the question.
I mean, I can tell you what my experience is, and these tend to be smaller dairies. This tends to be a opportunity for smaller dairies to gain revenue because raw milk can sell for a pretty high margin, but not exceptionally small dairies. I mean, I've certainly seen some here in New York State that are in the hundreds of lactating animals. So I've never seen anyone with a 5,000 cow dairy, but that could just be the limitation of my purview.
So Pam, I think one of the things that's interesting when we talk about consolidation in the dairy industry and the size of herds is the relationship between the size of herd and milk quality. Do you want to comment on that for everybody?
So there is, and you can find this on the FDA website as well, there is no documented relationship between the safety of milk and farm size. And that's because the safety of the milk is unpredictable. The pathogens that are found in raw milk, the primary health pathogens that are a problem are Campylobacter, E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria. Those are the most common ones we see causing health problems in the United States, with really devastating outcomes with the Escherichia toxin producing E. coli. And I served on a task force in Wisconsin for a whole year, a raw milk task force that issued a 260-page report dealing with can we test our way into selling raw milk healthily, which was concluded as not. And the problem with trying to equate small size or what you see as hygienic today on a farm with the safety of raw milk you buy is it's completely unpredictable. It's kind of like hiking. I like to hike in national parks where there's grizzly bears. And before I went hiking for the first time in Glacier National Park, I spent about 2 to 3 weeks studying grizzly bears, everything I could find about grizzly bears. And at the end of 2 or 3 weeks of spending all my time trying to figure out how do you hike safely with grizzly bears, I realized grizzly bears are completely unpredictable. Most of the time when you see them, they're going to go on their way and you're going to go on your way and everybody will be fine. And honestly, I have a lot of pictures of grizzly bears because I have hiked in areas with grizzly bears. And raw milk is exactly the same way. Those 4 pathogens I just mentioned contaminate somewhere between 1 to 10% of bulk tanks. And the problem is you can't predict which one is contaminated. The other thing about raw milk is immunologically healthy people who consume raw milk that's contaminated maybe with E. coli or something, if you're immunologically healthy, you're probably going to be fine. You may have a little diarrhea, you may be lucky and not have any terrible outcome. But if you're immunologically compromised, pregnant, a child, an elderly person, that same dosage of the Campylobacter, E. coli, Salmonella, or Listeria can result in devastating consequences. So it's an unpredictable chance of getting exposed to it. And then you've got personal vulnerabilities that will amplify that risk. And nobody can predict how those will interact.
So I'm going to ask Nicole as well as you, Pam, but I guess I'll go to Nicole, and then I want to ask Pam, and then I want to ask Daniel. But why can't you just get the bulk take sample, streak it out? Oh, bad guy here, bad guy here.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead, Pam.
So that milk isn't static.
What?
Okay, it's not static. You take your sample now, 10 minutes later, you may have an infective dose in there.
Oh.
I mean, it's a phenomenal growth media. The other thing is the cost to take a sample, test it, and then what that means is that, and then get that result back, you've got a minimum probably 48 hours by the time, even with PCR testing. And now you've spent probably $150 to $300 on that test. And all it did was tell you that at the moment you took that sample, there wasn't a large enough infective dosage for it to be positive. Okay.
No way. This is how it is.
I would add something to that. I think Pam is absolutely right. Typically, these pathogens start out at a fairly low concentration, but then think about what happens after a person shows up at the farm, gets a gallon of it, sticks it in the trunk of their car for 45 minutes, an hour, 3 hours. People will drive a really long way, right? And then keeps it in their refrigerator for 7 days. So Listeria grows at low temperatures. These other organisms can grow at abusive temperatures. So we're creating these, sort of opportunities for amplification of the organism during that period of time. So taking that bulk tank sample doesn't reflect what the consumer is actually putting into their body.
Do you do, but Nicole, when truckloads come into the milk processing plant and you offload it into a silo, you do some preliminary testing on sediment and overall bacterial load, or do you do any preliminary testing before you start processing it?
Not necessarily. So certainly we do antibiotic testing, right? Everybody should know that there are no antibiotics in the milk supply because we test it. Every single load of milk that comes into a processing facility gets tested.
I'm just thinking that's the next thing we're going to hear from, the antibiotics. Okay. Oh God.
But beyond that, some processors will take a sample and do what's called a direct microscopic count. And so that's a quick way of assessing how many bacteria are there. And certainly we have regulations on how many bacteria can be in that milk when it is received at the processing facility. But certainly the levels are well below what that regulatory limit is going to be, and often, well below what even the thresholds for quality would be for accepting that milk at the processing facility. So just because we do a total bacteria count or a DMC, a direct microscopic count, does not mean that we would reject milk that had pathogens in it. And so what I'm saying is there's no correlation between presence of pathogens and high bacteria count. You can have a low bacteria count and still have presence of pathogens. And
I want to ask Daniel a question. So they're throwing around. See, I'm not a microbiologist, okay? And Pam, these group, all three of you like to throw around these species, okay? That scare me. But are there, you talk about Salmonella, but I thought these Salmonella can swap genes in and out and be some are more virulent than others. So I guess the first question is, are there different strains of these bacteria we're talking about today that you're more afraid of or less afraid of, or as a clinician or just in general, which one of these guys really scares you, to treat a patient?
Yeah. So let me walk through so everyone will feel really comfortable with the names and what they are, right? So let's start off with Listeria, right? People have maybe heard of Listeria before, and part of this plays into who's drinking the milk. So Listeria is a particular bacteria that we worry about we say extremes of age, but it's not really extremes of age. It's like little kids and people over the age of 50. Over the age of 50, I don't think it's extreme of age. I think that's, proper mature age. So all right. So as pointed out, right? I mean, so you've got cows, which I really love cows, but they're kind of stinky, right? And you've got the teats where it's coming out, and the whole idea that that's going to be completely clean and there's no bacteria on there. And then somehow your hands are going to be completely clean, and then you're going to somehow get that milk into some kind of a vessel, and then that's going to stay completely clean. And then you're going to keep it nice and chilled so that the bacteria don't double every 8 hours, right? Which they can do at not even that warm a temperature with Listeria, for instance. So we worry about Listeria. Listeria, it can get into your brain. It can kill you. It is a horrible pathogen. Even when you know that's what your patient has, they're not going to necessarily survive.
Ooh.
Now, the next one that really gets us is this special E. coli that produces this Shiga toxin. So the Shiga toxin producing E. coli. Maybe people remember that burger place that everyone got sick. Do everyone remember that? And so here's particularly, again, it's the little kid. Maybe it's an adult over the age of 50, which is really just an adult in my mind. And now they're having some issues, so they go to the doctor and they tell that doctor that they need an antibiotic. And oh my gosh, that antibiotic can actually trigger you to end up in the hospital. We saw this recently, raw milk related, and those little kids can end up requiring dialysis. It can end up putting you into this hemolytic uremic syndrome where your blood cells start rupturing, your kidneys stop working. And this is just this, oh, my kid has really bad diarrhea. Doc, he really needs an antibiotic to get better. Lo and behold, you just turned what could have been a self-limiting diarrhea into your little kid in the hospital with kidney failure because you didn't want to boil the milk. And so we worry about those. Campylobacter, oh my gosh, not only can you get acutely really severe abdominal pain and diarrhea, but sometimes the inflammatory effect that comes a few weeks later, your joints hurt. You get basically all these inflammatory triggers. It can be horrible. So I think we worry about them all for different reasons. And, just to think that somehow, because the idea is the people that drink raw milk, they kind of want bacteria in there, right? It's this idea that there's good bacteria. That's why we don't want to boil it, because we want to get that good bacteria. But it's kind of a Russian roulette, because while you're trying to get your good bacteria, you can end up with Listeria, which could kill your child. You could end up with Campylobacter, which could make you really sick or even kill your child. You could end up with your child on dialysis because you were just trying to help them with an antibiotic after this horrible diarrhea. So we worry about all these, and then we even worry about more exotic stuff. Why did we originally start to boil the milk? Because really all pasteurization kind of is. We worried about tuberculosis. We worried about brucella. We basically, this is, I think, back to the original, this whole MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. I guess, there was a time in America when we had to worry about people getting tuberculosis and brucellosis and getting sick and dying from just having a glass of milk. Those are not the times we want to return back to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Daniel, I know you're passionate about vaccination and we're passionate about milk quality and the cleanliness of milk. And I think I'm going to come back to Nicole in a second, but I'm sure Nicole would say that milk is so much cleaner now than it was 50 years ago, because of all the things we do to make sure it's a healthy product and keep people healthy. And yet we're in an era where everybody's trying to turn back the hands of time for whatever reason, not based on science, but for whatever reason. So, but Pam, I want to ask you, Daniel brought up that, you're going to get species coming through even if you clean the udder, but we clean the heck out of these udders, all sorts of disinfectants, and some of them we take the hair off there because we don't want any stuff falling in from the hair. So why don't you work a little harder and get it a little cleaner in there and we can drink our raw milk? What's the story with that?
So, I've been a veterinarian a really long time. I've logged probably thousands of hours in milking parlors and taken tens of thousands of milk samples for my work. And we are doing a better job today than ever in hygiene of harvesting milk. And on our dairy farms, 65% of the milk comes from, it's almost half the milk is coming from a very small number of farms, about 20% 2,200 farms in the United States that have more than 3,500 cows. And those are shipping tankers of milk. So there's no sitting on the farm incubating. They go right into tankers and they're processed within hours of being harvested as soon as tankers fill. But the one thing that happens is cows are animals. They live on farms and they defecate, and milking units fall off and they suck big wads of manure that happen to be close to them into the milking system. And that just happens. Or, a teat isn't perfectly cleaned on every cow. You're milking 2,000 cows a day. That's 8,000 teats times 3 times a day. That's 24,000 teats that need to be cleaned. If we got an error rate of 1%, that's still a considerable number. So they're farms, they're animals. And that's why we have pasteurization. I do want to make a point as well. We pasteurize the milk we feed to the baby calves, folks. And we know if we do that, it reduces disease in baby calves. And so think about that one.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm giving talks, I say we don't have any anti-vaxxers on dairy farms. Okay. We don't. And so why we don't have anti-vaxxers on dairy farms? There's nobody says I'm not going to vaccinate my cows because I'm afraid they're going to get some weird disease. Same thing. Why can I walk into the veterinarian and I say, I got this puppy, what should I do? They don't say, well, I'm not sure if we should vaccinate it for all the little puppy diseases or not. We maybe just roll with it, or whatever. Right. So you bring up a good point. But Nicole, so this big tanker comes in, right? This big, and Pam does bring up an excellent point that many dairies own their own tankers. They just offload right from the parlor into the tanker, drive it to the processing plant, right? And then Nicole, you take it, you hook up some hose to it and it goes into a big silo, right? Or what happens? When does the pasteurization occur? When you guys, get back from lunch? Or do you guys go after it really fast? Because I want to know. It seems like
in most of our really large processing facilities, this is all happening sort of continuously, right? It's offloaded off the truck into a silo. That silo is going to go directly into the pasteurization or the processing facility. So it can really go from, the cow to a carton in less than 24 hours, right? So it's all very, very quick. It can be a little bit longer depending on the size of the facility and the size of the farm and the distribution channels and those kind of things. But this is a very well run process in this industry. So it does happen pretty quickly. I think that, talking about pasteurization and sort of what's going to happen, it depends on the product, right? What product we're making. But if we think just about a fluid milk system, the milk is going to come in, it's going to get separated. We're taking the fat and separating it out of the skim portion. We're often recombining that, or standardizing is what we call it. So if you want a 2% milk, you can have that. Or if you want your 1% or your skim, so you get a choice in what kind of fat level you want. That milk is homogenized. And this is all happening in line, right? So it's not going from a tank and then going to one step and then going back to a tank and going to another step, at least in our larger facilities. So it's getting homogenized to make sure that fat doesn't separate from the skim portion, and it's going directly into often high temperature short time pasteurization, which is the most common type of pasteurization that we use in the United States. That heat treatment is designed exactly to reduce the most heat-resistant vegetative pathogen that's found in raw milk by at least 5 log reduction. So
time out. So to just go through a big tube and that tube is really hot, or how does that work? Tell me what a pasteurization unit looks like.
Sure.
Red hot, do you stick, what? How does that work? And how hot does it have to be?
With high temperature short time, it's actually a series of metal plates that are stacked together. And the milk flows through those metal plates so that it's a very, very thin layer of milk. So the thinner the layer, the faster the heat transfer, right? If you're trying to heat up a big tube full of milk. It's going to take a lot of heat. It's going to take a lot of energy, and you're going to end up causing a lot of protein cooking onto the inside of that tube. But with this high temperature short time, the heat transfer is very, very quick. So it goes through a process where it starts to warm up in a part of that high temperature short time pasteurizer. It gets to the target temperature, which for high temperature short time is 72 degrees Celsius, which is 162 degrees Fahrenheit. I wrote it down for myself because I'm really bad at Celsius to Fahrenheit conversion. Right. So, but it reaches that target temperature, and then it actually stays at that temperature for at least 15 seconds. And that actually happens in a holding tube. So it warms up in those plates. It goes through a tube where it stays at that temperature for 15 seconds, or typically more like 20 seconds. And then it comes back into the pasteurizer where it goes through a cool down process. And that is the entire pasteurization process. 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds.
These bacteria are not very strong. 15 seconds?
No, and in fact, that's designed for the most heat resistant. Most of these pathogens, so we talk about Listeria or Campylobacter, E. coli, you're going to achieve much higher than a 5-log reduction of those pathogens with that heat treatment. But we do it to reduce the most heat resistant, so the one that's kind of the strongest, by at least 5-log, which is a big reduction.
Nicole, when you think about the raw milk, revolution, it's all about that process. Is that what everybody says ruins the milk, that 15 seconds? What ruins the milk?
Truly, this is a very minimal process, right? And then we have other pasteurization processes. So low temperature long time, which is 63 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes, that's a batch pasteurization process. So the milk goes into a heating tank. And in this case, it kind of works the way you were describing. There's steam around the outside. It's a steam jacket. The milk is on the inside. It gets agitated continuously, and the milk is warmed up to 63 degrees Celsius and held at that temperature for 30 minutes and then cooled down. These are not highly processed products. This is a very simple step to provide a massive reduction in risk of foodborne disease.
So Daniel, she said that it's a 5-log reduction in the species. So is that true in human medicine, that you think about dosage in terms of whether or not a person will get sick? Do I need a minimum? How do you talk about that in human medicine? Do I need a minimal dose to get sick, or are there dose response curves in terms of illnesses, or is it just like, well, if you had one bacteria, you're gonna get it? How does that work? Most doctors are math illiterate. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So whenever we want to bother our colleague, we put up a slide with an equation on it, and they all get intimidated and squirm, and you don't have to worry about anyone asking you a hard question after that. But no, we do. Numbers matter, and for instance, norovirus, winter vomiting disease, right? This is a great time to talk about it. We got a lot of that going on. We say maybe it's like 10 or 20 virions to make you sick. Right? Like nothing. That's bad. That's bad. But a lot of others, cholera, right? We all know about cholera, probably need like thousands. You need like a huge dose. So we do talk about the numbers and the inoculum that it takes to make you sick. So we live in a world where there's bacteria, there's pathogens, they're all around us. Like we don't live in a sterile world. So that's what we talk about. You're never going to make everything 100%, bacteria, virus free, but it's a question of trying to get it so low that even a child, even an adult over the age of 50 is not going to get sick when they consume it. And so a lot of these bacteria, you think about 5-log, that's a lot. That's going from 10,000 down to 1. Right? And just take away 5 of those zeros. Maybe it's 100,000. I don't know.
Yeah. 100,000 to 1.
100,000. Yeah. See, I told you doctors are all bad at math, right? 100,000 down to 1. That's 5 logs. 5 zeros are gone. So yeah, we do talk about that. And so we don't, even when we go swimming, they talk about, the coliform count, it got too high. You can't go swimming. You're like, wait, it got too high? I'm swimming in water with coliforms, with gut colon bacteria. You are. It's just a question of it's below a threshold. We don't live in a sterile world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any? So, Daniel, I had this for Nicole, and maybe Nicole thinks about this, but we talk about antibiotic resistant bacteria. And, are there any like heat resistant bacteria? Like, there's got to be, because we use in our thermocyclers, we use those, I don't know, those bacteria that isolated from the hot springs or something. But are there any bad pathogens that you can't even kill by sterilization, or is every bacteria sensitive to a certain amount of heat? That's the question.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's a little scary, but there are these incredibly resistant pathogens out there. There's even bacteria that's resistant to radiation, right? These radio resistant, and we actually put that in their names, right, just to sort of scare everyone. But no, it's become a growing issue. I hope everyone watched The Last of Us, just the first episode. After that, it gets a little bit. But as the world is becoming warmer, we're actually seeing pathogens not only getting used to higher temperatures, but we're even seeing this increased mutational rate that can happen at the higher temperatures. So, right now we're lucky, right? I mean, maybe this is like a labeling or a marketing thing. Like the whole idea that everyone's up in arms about 15 seconds. Your milk is at 72 degrees for 15 seconds. Oh my gosh. And the world has just ended and the government hates us because they're making us do that, right? Fortunately, that's all it takes.
Yeah. So Matt, yeah. I mentioned that pasteurization is designed for the most heat-resistant vegetative pathogen.
Okay.
There are these spore-forming pathogens that can survive much higher temperatures. Thankfully, they're very, very rare to cause disease in dairy products. So, and part of that is the fact that they are in this dormant stage when they're in the milk. So, I think that we do need to have a broader view, but when we're talking about where are the risks for the majority of the pathogens in raw milk, it's predominantly the vegetative pathogens that we've been talking about, but there are these other ones that are more heat resistant.
The spore formers, those are nasty. Yeah,
they are.
Yeah. So Pam, how come if got all these pathogens in the barnyard, how come the cows don't get sick? They should be sick.
They're mostly all commensals. And cows do get Listeria. Listeria is around. It's in silages and stuff. And as a clinician, when I was treating animals, I treated Listeria infections in cows on a regular basis. Campylobacter doesn't really cause disease in cattle, but it's very prevalent. I had a study one time that collected 25,000 fecal samples, and you basically, find it. Salmonella, in that same study, we were looking for Salmonella, and in that study, we found Salmonella on every single farm. Again, most of the time, it doesn't cause animals to become sick, but it does, and some strains of it, of course, like Dublin and others, are endemic and can cause a lot of problems for a long time. And then E. coli, it's specific strains of E. coli. You can find E. coli on every farm, but you don't always find the Shiga toxin-producing E. coli.
So some of these things might not really make a cow sick, but they might make a person sick. Is that the concept?
The ones we're finding in bulk tank milk typically aren't making the cow sick. But I will tell you, we routinely, over the years, just occasionally culture Listeria from a milk sample of a cow with mastitis. We routinely, we occasionally will culture Salmonella from a cow with mastitis. E. coli, of course, we find it's a very, very prevalent cause of mastitis in dairy cows, but not normally those really Shiga toxin producing E. coli. It's different strain.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting too on the Listeria side is that cows can have subclinical shedding of Listeria. And we actually worked with a small cheesemaker who was making a raw milk cheese that was positive for Listeria on finished product testing. And the grad student who was with us at the time was going out and taking samples, trying to figure out where this Listeria was coming from. And it turns out they had one cow in a 60 cow herd that was shedding Listeria. And that was what was ending up in the cheese product, was from that one cow, and they culled the cow, and that was the end of it. But she wasn't presenting any clinical symptoms. Yeah. She was just shedding.
Nicole, I had exactly the same circumstance. When I was in Wisconsin, I worked with a lot of the people starting these smaller artisanal cheeses, and I had exactly the same scenario. This was a 300 cow dairy. It wasn't 60 cow dairies, 300 cow dairy, single cow contaminated in cheese vat. 100% recall on finished product with Listeria relation from cheese milk.
So Nicole, these artisan cheeses, because that is one's kind of a sticky thing, because some of those, is there a reason some of these artisan cheeses require raw milk, or is that just the tradition that they're made with raw milk?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the style of cheese definitely can change with that pasteurization, right? So if you're trying to make a very particular type of cheese, making it with a raw product is, it does affect the characteristics of that product. So, we have here a 60-day aging rule for raw milk cheeses. So it is legal to make raw milk cheeses in the US. Certain types, you can't make a queso fresco out of raw milk, for example, because it doesn't age for the right amount of time. But for certain styles that have a low enough pH or a high enough salt content so the water activity is low, and then it ages for the appropriate amount of time, you can make certain styles of cheese out of raw milk legally. And yes, part of that is because certain styles are, historically made out of raw milk, and that affects the characteristics of that product.
So if you age it, all the bacteria die in there or something like that?
No, unfortunately. So during the aging process, though, it does affect the intrinsic characteristics of the cheese. So I mentioned pH, I mentioned water activity. And so those factors affect whether pathogens and many types of bacteria are able to grow under those conditions. And so that 60-day aging period is really meant to, again, sort of reduce the level of pathogens if they exist on those cheeses. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not like pasteurization. Pasteurization is a validated process where we know we're going to achieve a certain log reduction of certain harmful microorganisms. Cheese aging is not that controlled because, again, you are holding that product then in an open environment, and that open environment might also have pathogens in it, like Listeria, which likes to live in environments in cheese making facilities, et cetera. So it's certainly not a zero risk process, which is why we still recommend that pregnant women not eat raw milk cheeses, even though they undergo that 60-day aging period. There is still a residual risk there.
Well, what would happen if a pregnant woman got one of these Listerias? Do they lose the pregnancy or?
Yeah, that's right. So spontaneous abortion is one of the outcomes from contracting listeriosis during pregnancy.
Ooh.
There's a tragic case in January in New Mexico.
Yep.
A woman who was pregnant consumed raw milk. The raw milk had Listeria in it. It transferred to the infant, and the baby was born and then died with listeriosis from the mother's raw milk consumption. This just happened this January.
Daniel, I wanted to ask you about Raw Farm. You mentioned that, and you guys talked about that in your podcast the other day. I guess Raw Farm was the source of the latest outbreak.
Alleged, Matt, right?
Alleged. So I want to ask you a couple of questions. The first question is, how do those investigations proceed? I mean, how do they trace that back to Raw Farm? Is that an FDA job, or whose job is that to sort of, I mean, people get sick all the time. Okay. So At what point does an alarm bell say, wow, these people are all, I can't imagine. There's so many sick people everywhere all the time. How do you even figure out that they're all eating the same thing? How does that work?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times we don't catch it, right? There's a lot of times people get sick, you don't know, but every so often the alarm bells go off, and for some reason the alarm bells might go off. And then what happens, historically what's happened, is the CDC has a group, the Epidemiology Intelligence Service, the EIS, right? And these are like the detectives of epidemics. And this was always a great thing. I think they've cut the funding, of course. But anyway, what would happen is they would go out and they would investigate. And they investigate in several different ways. One is like the Dr. House, right? They're going out, they're talking to everyone, they're visiting the homes, they're finding out what did you eat. They're spending like an incredible amount of time. And in this case, they start to realize like, hey, over 90% of the people here ate this particular product from this particular manufacturer.
Right.
They do the molecular science stuff. They look and say, was it all the same? Does it look like there was a point source? It was just random coincidence. A bunch of people got it. And then they see, oh, actually, when you look at the genetics here, it looks like it was all pretty much the same infection, probably from the same source. And then the detectives have figured out that they all had this. And then in a perfect world, right, maybe you would actually go to this company and you'd say, hey, we want to start testing your cows. We want to find that one cow that's making everyone sick. But that doesn't always happen. You don't always get buy-in because, people don't want to know that it's their fault. They don't want to know that it's their cow. And that was unfortunately what we saw with this recent issue is the alleged culprit was really resistant to pulling their products off the shelves, where historically, usually, people have been pretty quick to say, oh my gosh, we don't want to make people sick. We don't want to kill little kids. We don't want little kids ending up in the hospital. But yeah, that's sort of the whole process.
So it's interesting in our litigious world, whether that's the future, like these companies throw it into the courts and they keep selling it for another, I don't know.
Yeah, they don't want to admit guilt. They don't want to take the financial hit. And so you do need to create an environment where you protect people and you say, okay, listen, if this is the case, we're going to protect you financially. We just don't want to see little kids getting sick and ending up in the hospital with renal failure.
Yeah.
You need a climate where you can all work together, because the goal is not to put the company out of business. The goal is not to punish them. I mean, I don't think they did this maliciously or with intent, but the goal is to protect people, to protect our children, to protect pregnant individuals, to protect people over the age of 50. Really, even you can be under 50 and still get sick, by the way.
Right. I don't think we've really maybe hit it hard enough. And I'm going to ask, Daniel, I'll ask you first, and then I'm going to ask Nicole, and then I'll ask Pam. Are we aware of any scientifically proven health benefits to consuming unpasteurized milk that have stood the test of time that, okay, well, there is this one thing that you can... Are you aware of anything, Daniel?
So I'm not, and and I don't think it's because it's out there and we just haven't come across it. It's like this is a tried and true, time-tested intervention. We're talking about a 15 seconds at a certain temperature to dramatically improve the safety of this product. If you want your probiotics, they sell them. You don't need to get them and risk the health of your child, a pregnant individual, the rest of us. So yeah, I'm gonna say this is all a misinformation. I don't think there's really any validity to this whole movement.
And then Nicole, is that your take on it too? Are you aware of anything from a dairy foods perspective?
No, I mean, nutritionally, there's certainly no evidence that raw milk is superior. Do we see differences after pasteurization? Yes, we do. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. There are some reductions in certain enzymes. There are some minor reductions in certain vitamins that are not there in very high concentrations to begin with. And I think where the breakdown is do those changes confer an effect on health, right? If I were to consume unpasteurized milk and, okay, so now I'm consuming some enzymes that were there in the milk natively, do those enzymes confer any health benefit to me? And the answer is no, they don't. So I think we need to acknowledge the fact that there are some changes during pasteurization, but those changes do not cause a nutritional difference in the milk that would confer some sort of meaningful nutritional difference for those people. And we talked about probiotics, right? I mean, if you want probiotics, eat some yogurt or, go eat some sauerkraut or, there's lots of ways to get probiotics. The level of beneficial bacteria in raw milk is very, very, very low. And when you consume that product, most of those bacteria are going to be eliminated anyway. You need 10 to the 8, right? You need a lot of those beneficial bacteria to cause a positive impact on your health. So go eat some yogurt. That's how you get that positive health benefit, not by, exposing yourself to really severe food-borne illness outcomes by consuming raw milk.
So, Pam, I'll ask you this question. Would you support national legislation to ban all raw milk sales?
Well, that's not my job. I get asked that all the time on media things. Honestly, I've done 8 of these because you asked earlier. Michigan is a state right now that has had legislation introduced this year to move from raw milk shares, which are allowed, to legal sale in stores of raw milk. And so this has been all over, and then it's spread around. I've done media interviews with a whole bunch of these places. And my answer is always, it's not my job to decide on legislation. My job is to tell people what the facts are about the risks. And the facts are the facts. I mean, you can say 2 + 2 = 5, or you can say 2 + 2 = 4, but it equals 4. And so the facts are you will introduce more risk. You will have people get sick. You can't predict who those people are who get sick. And, people get to decide whether or not they want within their states to do that. Historically, food safety laws have been at the state level for state level consumption. And federal laws like the pasteurized milk ordinance apply to milk that moves interstate. And so right now, milk that moves interstate must be pasteurized. And the states get to decide whether milk within a state can be consumed. And a lot of the recent legislation, we talked about MAHA, but it also has to do with politicians who support more freedom of choice and more states' rights. So, historically, whenever we get into these periods where we want more freedom of choice, less government regulation, more states' rights, that's when these legislative initiatives toward removing the requirement for pasteurization, allowing raw milk sales arise. And that's just what we're seeing. So my answer to that is it's not up to me. I don't get to decide that. I think it's extremely risky, and I think people will die because historically we know they do, or they get Guillain-Barré syndrome. I actually know someone who had Guillain-Barré syndrome, which can be that inflammatory outcome from Campylobacter. And the unfortunate thing is the people who are affected by these decisions that are made are often not the people making the decisions. It's really vulnerable people. And then, my husband, who's from a dairy farm and grew up drinking raw milk, will often say, if they're drinking raw milk, they shouldn't be covered by their insurance. Because why should society and the insurance companies be paying for these long-term outcomes of these people when people are taking known risks? I think that's a really valid argument. Why do the rest of us have to pay for bad decisions of individuals?
Yeah. So Nicole, if Cornell tells you, if the laws change in New York State, they say, Cornell tells you, well, in the Cornell Dairy, what is it, where you sell the ice cream? Why am I not?
Yeah, it's
Cornell Dairy.
It's just called Cornell Dairy, yeah.
Okay, yeah. You're going to put out raw milk. You're going to chain yourself to the bulk tank, or are you going to do that? What are you going to do?
Yeah, probably. I'll have to chain myself to the retail location. I think that the data is very, very clear as far as the risk. And I think that, Pam makes such a good point about, the larger societal impact. And, Daniel talked about physicians not being very good at math, but I think generally our society is not very good at interpreting risk, right? And we don't, do a good job at communicating risk to the general population. And I think that's where a lot of this goes down, whether there are regulations or no regulations around raw milk. People are going to drink raw milk because some people, there's a proportion of the population who is going to find a way to get this product regardless of whether it's legal or not. And I think what we're missing is we can't rely necessarily on regulations to improve public health in this way. I think what we do is we know when there are regulations. I cited this earlier. The CDC did a study where in states where raw milk is legal to sell, that's where we see more of the disease burden, right? And I think consumers do see the legal sale of raw milk as a green light, right? Like if I see raw milk in my supermarket, that must be a safe product. And they do have to put disclaimers, right? They have to label these things, but how much of it is the consumer just, confusion, for example, right? Like they don't even know what pasteurization is. It sounds scary. It sounds like a sciencey kind of word. And I saw on Instagram that raw milk is better for us. So I'm going to choose it, right? So I think we have to do a better job at communicating what the risks are. And just because, maybe you drank raw milk as a kid and you didn't get sick doesn't mean that it's safe, right? So I think a lot of it is about communication. Pam talked about, her husband's view on people getting insurance. And I think that societal burden is really important. We saw people during COVID who didn't take the precautions that were recommended, right? No masking, no social distancing, and folks getting very, very ill and then putting a burden on the public health system, emergency rooms and hospitals. I think it's the same thing with raw milk. We expect people to kind of make their own decisions and take their own risks. Well, it's my life. I'm going to drink this if I want to. But what happens if you get seriously ill? You go to the hospital, you take resources away from people who have maybe diseases that are not preventable. And I think that is something that we should be thinking about, right? About what is the larger societal impact of legalizing a product that we know is inherently risky.
So I want to ask Daniel this question because as both Pam and Nicole have mentioned, you drink it, it's on you, right? That's a slightly different thing where you don't get vaccinated for measles. It might be on you, but also might be on the other person that you give measles to, right? And then I was thinking about, this is probably a silly analogy, but when I was a kid, we all, with children, we all bounced around on the front seat like it was no big deal and didn't even wear seat belts. And now I couldn't imagine if you were a mother and didn't have your kid in a car seat, you would be basically, I don't know what would happen, but I'm sure I don't know, but people would be really upset. How could you put your child at risk, let them sit in the front seat? They're supposed to be in a car seat. And yet we're in a world now where parents don't vaccinate their children or parents feed them raw milk. So what is the deal with that, Daniel? Is it this medical? There is more data to suggest that vaccination, for example, is safe and effective way to prevent childhood disease than there is a car seat will prevent childhood injury, I'm sure. So what is the deal with that? That this world we live in, where a person has a right to their own bodies, for example, and will that go on forever? And then is that a medical establishment thing? Where did that philosophy come from? I'm just curious. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying
you could say it's wrong, Matt. I'd be on board with that. No, I mean, maybe people here are old enough to remember when seatbelts were first made mandatory, and there were all these people like arguing, I want to be thrown clear at 55 miles an hour. I feel like it's safer to be unseatbelted and thrown through the window. And they had all kinds of anecdotes. And no, I think society often goes through these periods. And usually, historically, there wasn't a dime to be made on this misinforming. The crazy uncle who wanted to be thrown out the window at 60 miles an hour on the highway, all right, we tolerated him at Thanksgiving, and then we didn't have to deal with that till next year because leveler heads prevailed. And so, we live in a community, we live in a society. And so when that 4-year-old shows up with, a disseminated bacterial infection, maybe they've got meningitis, maybe they're going to end up having permanent cognitive issues for the rest of their life. We take care of them. So your decision, your medical freedom, which is what they're saying, it's not medical freedom. I mean, the first freedom is health. And the first responsibility as a parent is the health and safety of your child. And so I think there's this movement to capitalize on people's ignorance, on people's fear, on people's distrust of government, and as was mentioned, if you put raw milk on the shelves, people assume, oh, this must be okay. This must be safe. And that's not true. If you start driving around with your kids sitting on the front seat, unbelted, not in a child's safety seat, that's not okay. And you should be shamed. You should be criticized because you have a responsibility. So yeah, and I think unfortunately we're living in this world now that is upside down, where people are basically misinforming for their own personal agenda about vaccines, about food safety, about so many things. And yeah, the world is kind of upside down, and hopefully there's going to be some sanity on the horizon.
So we're a little bit over time, but I wanted to make sure everybody has before we talk about Parasites Without Borders, I want to make sure everybody has a little bit of time if there's anything else they would like to add at this point, because we've skipped over a lot of things. I think I'll start with Pam. Pam, is there anything else you'd like just to say at this point, or have you thought about that you'd like to mention?
No, I think we're good. I think we've covered all of the important points, really.
Pam is speechless. This is not normal. Okay. She's like, I got to get to my cabin. Do you have the cat packed up and you're ready to go or what?
I don't know. I got to get home first.
Nicole?
I would just briefly say that I think one of the things that I want people to know, because I think one of the reasons that some people choose raw milk is because they like the idea of knowing where their food comes from. They like the idea that they can go to a farm and they can meet the person who's producing the food and they can see the animals and they can see the condition of the farm. You can get that. If that's why you're choosing raw milk, you can get that and still get the protection of pasteurization. We have a lot of small manufacturers who are making fluid milk and cheese and ice cream and butter and all the things you want to consume, but are still using pasteurization to do that with, to process those products. So if somebody's listening to this and is like, I really do want a pasteurized product, but I love the idea of knowing where my food comes from, you can have both. You don't have to choose between them.
That is a great message. That's a great message, Nicole. That is just a wonderful message for everyone listening. Daniel, did you have anything before you tell us about Parasites Without Borders? Do you have anything you'd like to add to this conversation? I think it's been a great conversation.
I'll echo. It has been a great conversation, and hopefully for everyone listening, they have a better sense of, you can have all those things that you want. You can have that experience of knowing where your food comes from. You can have a healthy, safe product with really a simple, time-tested, very safe. This is not milk is not a highly processed food. This is not the stuff that's going to get you in trouble. This is the stuff that's going to make you healthy and, strong bones and teeth and all the stuff people are familiar with. And hopefully everyone who's listening is going to come away rethinking, realizing that there are some people out there saying stuff that's just not true.
So Parasites Without Borders, I know you're fundraising right now. Is that your society or your thing, or tell us about Parasites Without Borders? So
I'm the president, but it's a not-for-profit, so it's everyone's organization. So This Week in Parasitism was founded about a decade ago, and our slogan is getting knowledge to the people and places that need it the most. So gosh, this is right on target with what we want to do as our mission. Right now, we're in our fundraiser. We're raising money for Floating Doctors, a group down in Panama. And I think after that, we're going to do FIMRIC, which is the group in Uganda. But if you go to parasiteswithoutborders.com during these fundraisers, we double the donations and we help support our sister organizations.
That's a fantastic story. This has been a really good podcast. I knew it would be really good. I wanted to say thank you to all three of you for agreeing to do this. Maybe it's like Vincent says, maybe if we get the truth out a little bit, we move the needle a little tiny bit, and try. But I want to thank you again for such an engaging and insightful discussion. I truly appreciate your sharing. I really appreciate the sincerity with which everybody spoke today. And I thought that was wonderful. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this episode of Dairy Digressions. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, subscribe, and rate the podcast, and consider sharing it with a colleague or friend. We always welcome your feedback. Feel free to reach out to us at adsa@adsa.org. For show notes, past episodes, and updates on everything happening at ADSA, visit adsa.org. And until next time, thanks for listening. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. This is Matt Lucy, host of Dairy Digressions. In my many years as an ADSA member, I have come to understand the great value that membership brings. Many people become members to take advantage of reduced publication charges and discounts for meeting registrations. Those are great perks for ADSA members. But membership is more than that. As an ADSA member, you're connected to scientists, educators, and industry professionals in the global dairy community. Think of your membership as an investment in your future and join today. Learn more about ADSA and the advantages of ADSA membership at adsa.org.